The morning sun cast long shadows across the military firing range as Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his ceremonial red tunic for the last time that day. At 32, he had spent 8 years as a Queen's Guard, standing motionless outside Buckingham Palace, enduring tourists' jokes and photographers' flashes. Today was different. Today, he was finally attending the joint military training exercise he had requested months ago. Marcus walked toward the registration tent, his polished black boots crunching on the gravel. Other soldiers were already gathering, their camouflage uniforms making his red ceremonial dress stand out like a beacon. He could feel their eyes on him, hear the whispered comments and barely contained laughter. "Look what we have here," called out Corporal Jenkins, a stocky man with a thick Yorkshire accent. Did someone get lost on their way to the palace? The group around him erupted in laughter, their voices carrying across the range. Marcus remained silent, his face expressionless. Years of standing guard had taught him the art of showing no reaction. No matter what people said or did around him, he simply nodded politely and continued toward the registration desk. "I bet he's never even held a real rifle," whispered Private Collins to his companion. "Probably just for show, those palace guards. All ceremony, no substance." The registration officer, a weathered sergeant major, looked up from his clipboard with surprise. "Royal Guard?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "This is a combat training exercise, son. You sure you're in the right place?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied calmly. "Sergeant Marcus Thompson, requesting permission to participate in today's marksmanship competition." The sergeant major shrugged and handed him a form. "Well, it's open to all military personnel, but I should warn you, we've got some serious shooters here today. Elite units, special forces candidates. This isn't a ceremonial drill." As Marcus filled out the paperwork, more soldiers gathered around, their curiosity piqued by the unusual sight. Some took photos with their phones, already planning to share the joke with their friends back at base. A few made comments about toy soldiers and palace decorations. Lieutenant Harrison, a young officer from the parachute regiment, approached with a smirk. "Tell me, guard, do you actually know which end of the rifle the bullets come out of? Or do you just hold it for pictures?" Marcus finished his paperwork and handed it back to the sergeant major. "I know enough, sir," he said simply. The crowd of soldiers grew larger, word spreading quickly about the Queen's Guard, who thought he could compete with real soldiers. Bets started forming about how badly he would perform. Most gave him credit for courage, but predicted he would embarrass himself within minutes. "This should be entertaining," laughed Captain Davies from the Royal Marines. "I almost feel sorry for him." "Almost." Marcus walked toward the equipment station to collect his rifle and ammunition. The armorer, a grizzled veteran with 20 years of service, looked him up and down skeptically. "You ever fired anything other than blanks, mate?" he asked, handing over a standard L85A2 rifle. "Once or twice," Marcus replied, checking the weapon with practiced efficiency. His movements were smooth and automatic. But the other soldiers were too busy joking to notice the professional way he handled the rifle. The firing range consisted of multiple lanes, stretching out to various distances. Targets were set at 100, 300, and 600 meters. The competition would test accuracy, speed, and precision under pressure. Electronic scoring systems would track every shot, eliminating any possibility of disputes. As Marcus made his way to Lane 7, the comments continued to fly. Soldiers lined up on either side of him, some of the military's finest marksmen. Staff Sergeant Reynolds from the SAS selection course was in Lane 5. Corporal Martinez, a sniper instructor from Catterick, occupied Lane 9. These were men whose reputations were built on their shooting skills. "Hey, Palace Guard," called out Private Williams from Lane 6. "When you miss every target, just remember it's not your fault. You were trained to miss on purpose, right? Can't have the tourists getting scared." Marcus began setting up his position, adjusting the rifle sling and checking his sight picture. Around him, other competitors were doing the same, but their preparation seemed more serious, more professional. They had custom equipment, specialized shooting jackets, and modifications to their rifles that spoke of years of competitive shooting. The range safety officer announced the first phase of the competition would begin in 5 minutes. Competitors would have 3 shots at each distance, starting with the closest targets and working their way back. Time limits would apply, adding pressure to an already challenging test. Marcus lay prone behind his rifle, settling into a comfortable shooting position. The familiar weight of the weapon felt good in his hands, bringing back memories he had kept buried for years. Memories of different places, different targets, and different stakes than a simple military competition. The other soldiers continued their commentary, confident that they were about to witness a spectacular failure. Some had already started planning how they would retell the story to their friends. The Queen's Guard, who thought he could shoot with the big boys. None of them noticed the subtle changes in Marcus as he prepared for the competition. The way his breathing became controlled and rhythmic. The stillness that settled over him like a familiar cloak. The slight adjustment of his grip that spoke of muscle memory, developed through thousands of hours of practice. The range fell quiet as competitors made their final preparations. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself for what was to come. When he opened them again, something had changed. The ceremonial guard had disappeared, replaced by something else entirely. The first whistle was about to blow, and Marcus Thompson was ready to remind everyone that appearances could be very deceiving indeed. The sharp blast of the whistle cut through the morning air, signaling the start of the first phase. Marcus settled behind his rifle, his world narrowing to the target 100 meters downrange. Around him, the other competitors began firing, the rapid crack of rifles filling the air. Marcus took a breath, let half of it out, and gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder and he immediately worked the bolt, chambering another round. No hesitation, no second guessing. His movements were fluid and automatic, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. Private Williams in the next lane fired his first shot and cursed under his breath. The electronic display showed a 7-ring hit, respectable but not exceptional. He glanced over at Marcus, expecting to see confusion or panic. Instead, he saw perfect stillness. Marcus fired his second shot, then his third, each one feeling natural and right. The rhythm of breathing, aiming, and firing was like riding a bicycle. Some things, once learned properly, were never truly forgotten. The electronic scoring system chirped as it registered the shots. Down at the 100-meter line, Marcus's target displayed 3 holes clustered tightly in the center. The range officer called out scores over the loudspeaker, starting with Lane 1 and working his way across. Lane 1, 26 points. Lane 2, 24 points. Lane 3, 28 points. The scores were solid but not exceptional. These were good soldiers, but the 100-meter distance was considered easy by competition standards. Lane 4, 27 points. Lane 5, 29 points. Staff Sergeant Reynolds from the SAS course had shot well as expected. His reputation as an instructor was well earned. Lane 6, 23 points. Private Williams grimaced at his score. The 7-ring first shot had cost him. Lane 7, 30 points. Perfect score. A moment of silence fell over the range. Some soldiers looked up from their rifles, certain they had misheard. Marcus remained in position, already preparing for the 300-meter phase. Corporal Jenkins laughed nervously. "Beginner's luck," he called out. "Wait until the real distances start. Lane 8, 26 points. Lane 9, 28 points." Corporal Martinez, the sniper instructor, had shot well but not perfectly. He glanced over at Marcus with newfound interest. The competitors had 2 minutes to adjust their sights for the 300-meter targets. Most began making careful adjustments to their scopes, calculating for the increased distance. Marcus made a single small adjustment, his movements economical and precise. Lieutenant Harrison, reloading his magazines, shook his head. "One perfect score doesn't make you a marksman, Guard. Let's see how you handle a real distance." The 300-meter targets were smaller and required more precision. Wind became a factor and the pressure began to mount. This was where the difference between casual shooters and serious marksmen became apparent. Marcus settled into position again, his breathing steady and controlled. Through his sights, the target seemed to grow larger, his focus becoming laser-sharp. The noise of other rifles faded to background static as he entered what experienced shooters called the zone. His first shot rang out, clean and crisp. The bullet struck home with authority, and Marcus cycled the bolt without lifting his head from the rifle. The second shot followed quickly, then the third, each one feeling inevitable rather than hoped for. Around him, other competitors were struggling more with the increased distance. The wind had picked up slightly, adding an element of complexity that separated the experienced from the amateur. Muttered curses and frustrated sighs punctuated the air as soldiers realized their shots weren't landing where intended. The scoring system updated again, and the range officer began calling out results. The scores were lower now, as expected. 24 and 25-point scores were common, with only a few achieving higher marks. Lane 4, 26 points. Lane 5, 28 points. Reynolds was still shooting consistently, proving his expertise. Lane 6, 22 points. Williams was falling behind, the pressure beginning to affect his performance. Lane 7, 30 points. Another perfect score. This time, the silence lasted longer. Soldiers began to look at Marcus with more than casual interest. 2 perfect scores in a row was beyond luck. It suggested skill, real skill. Captain Davies from the Royal Marines called out, "What's your background, guard? You shooting competitively before this?" Marcus continued his preparations for the 600-meter phase, the most challenging distance of the competition. "Just hobby shooting, sir," he replied calmly. The lie came easily, practiced from years of maintaining his cover. Nobody needed to know about the classified missions. The targets eliminated at distances most soldiers couldn't even see clearly. His military record showed only his current assignment and basic training. Everything else was buried so deep that even most high-ranking officers couldn't access it. Corporal Martinez, the sniper instructor, studied Marcus more carefully now. Something about the man's shooting position and rifle handling was familiar. Professional in a way that went beyond basic military training. The way he breathed, the steadiness of his hold, the confidence in his movements, these were the hallmarks of an expert marksman. 600 meters coming up, announced the range officer. "This is where we separate the wheat from the chaff, gentlemen." At 600 meters, targets appeared smaller than a man's thumbnail when viewed through iron sights. Most competitors were using scoped rifles, but even with magnification, precision became exponentially more difficult. Environmental factors like wind, temperature, and even the rotation of the earth began to matter. Marcus made another slight adjustment to his sights, compensating for the distance and the crosswind he could feel on his face. His movements remained calm and methodical, showing no sign of the pressure that was clearly affecting others. The whistle blew for the final phase, and Marcus settled into what he knew would be the deciding moment. This was the distance where his years of specialized training would either reveal themselves or remain hidden forever. Either way, he was ready to show these soldiers that the quiet guard in the red tunic was far more than he appeared to be. At 600 meters, the targets looked impossibly small through the rifle sights. The wind had strengthened, creating a crosswind that would push bullets off course if not properly calculated. This was the distance where even experienced soldiers struggled, where the difference between good shooters and exceptional ones became crystal clear. Marcus lay behind his rifle, feeling the familiar calm that had kept him alive in places most people couldn't pronounce. The target downrange was just another problem to solve, another calculation to make. Wind speed, direction, temperature, humidity, all factors he had learned to read like a book written in his native language. Around him, other competitors were taking their time, making careful adjustments and second-guessing themselves. The pressure was visible on their faces, sweat beating despite the cool morning air. This was the moment where confidence either carried you through or crumbled under the weight of expectation. Staff Sergeant Reynolds fired first, his shot echoing across the range. Through binoculars, the range officer could see the impact, a solid 8-ring hit, good but not exceptional. Reynolds fired again, another 8-ring. His third shot drifted slightly, catching the 7-ring. 23 points at 600 meters was respectable for most soldiers. Corporal Martinez, the sniper instructor, took his time between shots. His first hit the 9-ring, drawing approving nods from observers. His second shot matched the first. The third sailed slightly high, clipping the 10-ring for his best shot of the series. 28 points, an excellent score that would be hard to beat. Private Williams was struggling badly now. The distance had exposed the limitations of his training, and his shots were scattered across the target face. 18 points would put him near the bottom of the competition. Lieutenant Harrison managed 21 points, better than Williams but well behind the leaders. His confidence from earlier in the day had evaporated as the competition progressed, and the true skill levels became apparent. Captain Davies shot a solid 25 points, proving his Marine training. But even he was shaking his head at the difficulty of the 600-meter targets. "Bloody hell," he muttered, "this is harder than I remembered." The attention now focused on Marcus in lane 7. The crowd of spectators had grown as word spread about the Queen's Guard who was shooting perfect scores. Officers and NCOs from other units had come to watch, drawn by curiosity and skepticism in equal measure. Marcus controlled his breathing, letting his heart rate settle. Through his sights, the target seemed to pulse slightly with each heartbeat. He waited for the natural respiratory pause, that moment between breaths when the body was perfectly still. His first shot broke cleanly, the trigger pull straight back without disturbing his sight picture. The rifle recoiled and Marcus rode it naturally before settling back on target. Downrange, the spotting scope confirmed what he already knew, dead center 10 ring. The second shot followed the same ritual. Breathe, settle, find the natural pause, squeeze. Another 10 ring, the bullet hole so close to the first that they nearly touched. For his third shot, Marcus made a tiny adjustment, reading a subtle change in the wind that others had missed. The shot felt perfect the moment it left the barrel, and the spotting scope confirmed another center hit. Lane 7, 30 points. Third perfect score of the day. The range fell completely silent. 3 perfect scores was beyond remarkable. It was unprecedented in the history of the base's shooting competitions. Soldiers stood with their mouths open, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Corporal Martinez lowered his binoculars slowly, his expression thoughtful. In 15 years of training snipers, he had never seen shooting like this from someone who claimed to be just a ceremonial guard. The consistency, the confidence, the way Marcus handled pressure, it all pointed to one thing. "That's not possible," whispered Private Williams. "Nobody shoots 3 perfect scores their first time out. Nobody." Staff Sergeant Reynolds was studying Marcus with new eyes. Something about the man's demeanor triggered memories from his own SAS training. The calm under pressure, the economical movements, the way he seemed to exist in a bubble of concentration that external noise couldn't penetrate. The range officer announced a brief break before the speed round, where competitors would have to engage multiple targets under time pressure. This phase would test not just accuracy, but the ability to transition between targets quickly while maintaining precision. Marcus stood and stretched, showing no signs of fatigue or stress. Around him, other competitors were huddled in groups discussing his performance in hushed tones. Some were convinced it was an elaborate practical joke. Others suspected there was more to the quiet guard than met the eye. Captain Davies approached Marcus directly. "That was some impressive shooting, Sergeant. Mind if I ask where you learned to handle a rifle like that?" Marcus smiled politely, the same expression he used with tourists at the palace. "Just practice, sir." "Lots of practice. Practice where?" Davies pressed. "That kind of precision doesn't come from weekend shooting clubs." "Here and there, sir. Different ranges, different opportunities." Marcus's answers were polite but revealed nothing concrete. He had learned long ago that the best way to deflect curiosity was to be helpful without being informative. Lieutenant Harrison couldn't contain his frustration. "This is ridiculous. Guards don't shoot like that. It's just not possible." Corporal Martinez overheard and decided to voice his growing suspicions. "What unit were you with before the Queen's Guard, Thompson?" Marcus checked his rifle, preparing for the speed round. "Standard infantry training, sir. Nothing special." But Martinez wasn't buying it. The shooting he had just witnessed was special forces level, maybe even beyond that. The kind of marksmanship that took years to develop and thousands of rounds to maintain. This wasn't a hobby shooter having a lucky day. The range officer called for competitors to prepare for the final phase. Multiple targets at varying distances, 30 seconds to engage them all. Miss one and points would be deducted. Take too long and the same penalty applied. As Marcus took his position for the final challenge, whispers spread through the growing crowd of spectators. Word was reaching the base commander, drawing attention from the highest levels. The Queen's Guard who shot like a ghost was about to face his ultimate test. The speed round would either confirm what many were beginning to suspect, or reveal him as an incredibly lucky amateur. Either way, Marcus Thompson was about to show everyone exactly what 8 years of standing perfectly still had really taught him about focus under pressure. The speed round setup was intimidating even for experienced soldiers. 5 targets at different ranges, 100, 200, 300, 400, and 500 meters. Each target was numbered, and competitors had to engage them in sequence within 30 seconds. Miss a target or go over time, and severe point penalties would apply. Colonel Bradley, the base commander, had arrived to witness the final phase personally. Word had reached his office about the Queen's Guard who was shooting impossible scores, and his curiosity had gotten the better of him. He stood behind the firing line with binoculars, studying Marcus with the keen eye of a soldier who had seen real combat. 30 seconds, announced the range officer. Engage targets in numerical sequence, 1 through 5. Competitors ready? Marcus loaded a fresh magazine, his movements automatic and fluid. Around him, other soldiers were making last-minute adjustments to their equipment, checking slings and testing bolt actions. The pressure was visible on their faces. This phase would separate the truly skilled from the merely competent. Staff Sergeant Reynolds had positioned himself for rapid target acquisition, his rifle already pointed downrange. As an SAS instructor, he was confident in his ability to handle the time pressure. But 3 perfect scores from the ceremonial guard had shaken his confidence more than he cared to admit. Corporal Martinez was focused on his breathing, trying to calm his nerves before the crucial phase. His reputation as a sniper instructor was on the line now. Being outshot by someone claiming to be just a hobby shooter would be professionally embarrassing. The whistle blew, starting the 30-second countdown. Marcus moved like liquid precision. His rifle swung to the first target and he fired almost immediately. No hesitation, no second guessing. The bullet struck home and he was already transitioning to the second target before the shot's echo faded. Target 2, fire. Target 3, fire. His movements were economical and deliberate, each shot flowing naturally into the preparation for the next. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary adjustments. It was like watching a master craftsman at work. Around him, other competitors were struggling with the time pressure. Reynolds was shooting well but taking too long between targets. Martinez was accurate but slow on his transitions. Several soldiers were already falling behind the pace needed to complete the course on time. Target 4 engaged, another solid hit. Marcus swung to the final target at 500 meters, the most challenging shot under time pressure. Through his sights, he could see the target clearly, his focus absolute despite the ticking clock and the crowd of spectators. His final shot rang out with authority. 5 targets, 5 hits, and Marcus lowered his rifle with 8 seconds still remaining on the clock. He had completed the most challenging phase of the competition with time to spare, maintaining his perfect accuracy under extreme pressure. The electronic scoring system confirmed what the spotting scopes had already revealed. 5 more perfect hits. The crowd of spectators erupted in amazed chatter, some applauding spontaneously while others shook their heads in disbelief. Time, called the range officer, though several competitors were still shooting frantically to beat the clock. Colonel Bradley lowered his binoculars slowly, his expression thoughtful. In 30 years of military service, including tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, he had never seen shooting like this from anyone outside special operations units. The speed, accuracy, and composure under pressure were textbook special forces. The final scores were announced over the loudspeaker. Most competitors had struggled with the time pressure, their accuracy suffering as they rushed to beat the clock. Several had failed to engage all targets in time, receiving significant penalties. Third place, Staff Sergeant Reynolds, 87 points total. Reynolds nodded grimly, a respectable score but far from his best performance. The pressure of competing against the mysterious guard had affected his shooting more than he wanted to admit. Second place, Corporal Martinez, 91 points total. Martinez managed a tight smile. As the base's senior marksmanship instructor, second place was acceptable but not exceptional. He found himself studying Marcus with professional curiosity, trying to identify the subtle signs that would reveal his true background. First place, Sergeant Marcus Thompson, 150 points. Perfect score. The announcement was met with stunned silence. A perfect score in a military marksmanship competition was virtually unheard of. Even elite special forces operators rarely achieved such consistency under pressure. Marcus began cleaning his rifle, his demeanor unchanged by the attention he was receiving. Years of maintaining operational security had taught him to show no reaction to success or failure. Both could reveal more than enemies needed to know. Private Williams approached hesitantly, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine awe. "Mate, that was incredible shooting. I've never seen anything like it. Where did you really learn to shoot like that?" Marcus smiled politely. Practice makes perfect, Private, just like anything else. But Captain Davies wasn't satisfied with vague answers anymore. Sergeant Thompson, I've been in the Marines for 12 years. I've seen Special Forces operators train, and I've competed against Olympic shooters. What you just did requires more than hobby practice. Colonel Bradley stepped forward, his command presence immediately focusing everyone's attention. Sergeant Thompson, if I could have a word with you privately? Marcus nodded respectfully. Of course, sir. They walked away from the crowd, stopping near the base headquarters building. Colonel Bradley studied Marcus carefully, noting details that others had missed. The way he carried himself, his alertness to surroundings, the calm confidence that came from facing real danger. Son, I've been in this business long enough to recognize certain types of training. That shooting performance was special operations level. SAS, SBS, maybe even something more specialized. The colonel paused, choosing his words carefully. Your service record shows standard infantry training and 8 years with the Queen's Guard. Nothing that would explain what I just witnessed. Marcus maintained his polite expression, but said nothing that would confirm or deny the colonel's suspicions. I'm not asking you to reveal classified information, Bradley continued, but I am curious about how a ceremonial guard developed skills that would make him competitive with our best operators. The answer Marcus gave would determine whether his carefully maintained cover continued or whether questions would be asked that he couldn't deflect with politeness and vague responses. Standing in the shadow of the headquarters building, he had to decide how much truth was safe to reveal. Colonel Bradley waited patiently for Marcus's response, his experienced eyes missing nothing. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of soldiers discussing the remarkable shooting display they had just witnessed. Marcus weighed his options carefully. His cover had been meticulously crafted over 8 years, supported by official records that would satisfy most inquiries. But Colonel Bradley wasn't most people. The man had clearly seen enough real combat to recognize the signs of advanced military training. Sir, I understand your curiosity, Marcus finally said, but I can assure you that my service record is accurate and complete. Bradley nodded slowly, recognizing the careful non-answer for what it was. Sergeant, in my experience, there are 2 types of soldiers who speak that precisely about their service records. Those who have nothing to hide, and those who have everything to hide for very good reasons. A motorcycle messenger roared past on the nearby road, the sound causing Marcus to track the movement automatically while maintaining his conversation with the colonel. The reaction was subtle but unmistakable to someone trained to notice such things. Your situational awareness is excellent, Bradley observed. Most ceremonial guards I've met are focused inward, concerned with posture and appearance. You scan your environment like someone who's had to worry about threats from unexpected directions. Marcus realized he was revealing more than intended. Through unconscious habits developed over years of operational deployment, the colonel was right. His training was showing through despite his best efforts to appear ordinary. Back at the firing range, the competition was officially over, but the spectators weren't dispersing. Groups of soldiers huddled together, trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. The consensus was clear. Marcus Thompson was far more than he appeared to be. Staff Sergeant Reynolds was sharing his suspicions with Corporal Martinez. I've trained with some of the best shooters in the world. What that man just did requires thousands of hours of practice under stress. You don't develop that kind of muscle memory shooting at weekend competitions. Martinez nodded agreement. The way he handled the pressure, the consistency under time constraints. I've only seen that level of performance from operators who've been downrange. Real downrange where mistakes get you killed. Lieutenant Harrison was still struggling to accept what he had seen, but he's been standing guard at Buckingham Palace for 8 years. When would he have time for that kind of training? When would he have gained that kind of experience? Captain Davies had been thinking the same thing. Unless, he said slowly, the Queen's Guard assignment isn't his first posting. Maybe it's where they put certain types of soldiers when they need to disappear for a while. The suggestion hung in the air like a revelation. Several special forces units used cover assignments to hide operators between missions or during recovery periods. The idea that ceremonial guards might serve the same purpose was intriguing and disturbing in equal measure. Colonel Bradley decided to try a different approach with Marcus. Tell me about your time before the Queen's Guard. Standard infantry, you said? Yes, sir. 2nd Battalion, Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. Basic training, then 2 tours overseas before applying for the Guard. Which theater? Bradley asked casually. Marcus hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Afghanistan, sir. Helmand Province. Bradley's expression sharpened. Helmand had been one of the most dangerous postings during the height of operations. Infantry soldiers stationed there had seen serious combat, but the kind of marksmanship skills Marcus displayed typically came from specialized units operating in that region. What was your role in Helmand? Standard infantry operations, sir. Patrols, checkpoint duty, convoy security. Bradley nodded, but his mind was working through the implications. Helmand Province had been home to some of the most sensitive special operations in recent military history. Units that officially didn't exist had operated from bases that weren't on any maps, conducting missions that would never appear in any official records. A young corporal approached them, saluting smartly. Sir, there's a phone call for you. They said it was urgent. Bradley excused himself, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. The conversation had gone better than expected, but he could sense the colonel's growing suspicions. How long before someone decided to dig deeper into his background? When Bradley returned 5 minutes later, his demeanor had changed completely. The casual curiosity was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like recognition. Sergeant Thompson, he said formally, that was an interesting phone call. It seems your shooting performance today has attracted attention from some very high places. Marcus felt a chill of apprehension. High places could mean anything from military leadership to intelligence services. Neither option was particularly appealing for someone trying to maintain a low profile. Sir, it appears that certain people are very interested in discussing your background and your future career prospects. They'll be sending a car for you this afternoon. The message was clear without being explicit. Marcus's cover was about to be blown, or perhaps it already had been. Someone with the authority to make phone calls to base commanders had taken an interest in his activities. In the meantime, Bradley continued, I think it would be best if you remained on base as my guest, just until this afternoon's meeting resolves certain questions about your service history. It wasn't quite an arrest, but it wasn't freedom either. Marcus nodded his acceptance, recognizing that he had few options at this point. The perfect shooting scores that were supposed to be a simple training exercise had opened doors he had hoped would remain closed forever. As they walked back toward the base headquarters, Bradley spoke quietly. For what it's worth, Sergeant, whatever your real story is, that was some of the finest shooting I've ever witnessed. Your skills are a credit to whoever trained you. Marcus thanked him politely, but his mind was already working through contingency plans. After 8 years of quiet anonymity, his past was about to catch up with him in ways he had hoped never to experience again. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of the base conference room where Marcus waited. He had been provided with tea and biscuits, treated more like a valued guest than a person under suspicion. But the 2 military police officers stationed outside the door made his true status clear enough. At precisely 3 o'clock, Marcus heard vehicles approaching. Through the window he watched as 2 black Range Rovers pulled up to the headquarters building. The vehicles bore no military markings, and the men who emerged wore civilian clothes that screamed government service. Colonel Bradley entered the room accompanied by a tall, thin man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit. The newcomer's bearing and confidence suggested senior intelligence services, someone accustomed to asking questions that others were required to answer. Sergeant Thompson, Bradley said formally, this is Mr. Davidson from the Ministry of Defense. He'd like to discuss your performance at today's competition. Davidson studied Marcus with pale gray eyes that missed nothing. Sergeant Thompson, or should I say Operator Thompson? Your shooting exhibition this morning was quite remarkable. Perfect scores at distances that challenge even our best marksmen. Marcus maintained his polite expression, but said nothing that would confirm or deny the title Davidson had used. The man clearly knew more than he was revealing. 8 years ago, Davidson continued, one of our most effective operators requested assignment to the Queen's Guard, following a particularly difficult mission in Syria. The official reason was stress and a desire for ceremonial duty. The unofficial reason was somewhat different. Davidson opened a thin file folder and placed a photograph on the table. It showed Marcus in different clothing, carrying different equipment, in a location that Marcus recognized but had hoped never to see again. The mission was classified at the highest levels, a terrorist leader who had evaded capture for 3 years. eliminated by a single shot at 800 meters in downtown Damascus. The shot was taken from a building that was supposedly impossible to access without detection. Marcus stared at the photograph, memories flooding back of that night. The intelligence briefings, the insertion through hostile territory, the patient wait for the perfect shot, the target who would never threaten British interests again. After that mission, Davidson continued, our operator reported being burned out, psychologically exhausted by the demands of special operations. He requested assignment to the quietest, most routine posting available. The Queen's Guard seemed perfect. Ceremony, tradition, standing still for hours. No decisions, no pressure, no lives hanging in the balance. Colonel Bradley was listening with growing amazement. The quiet ceremonial guard who had dominated his firing range was apparently one of the most effective special operations soldiers in British military history. Davidson placed more photographs on the table. Different locations, different missions, but always the same result. High-value targets eliminated with surgical precision from distances that seemed impossible. 12 confirmed kills, Davidson said quietly, all at ranges exceeding 600 meters. All one-shot eliminations. All targets that posed immediate threats to British national security. Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady despite the weight of memories being laid bare. That was a different life, sir. I requested the transfer because I wanted something peaceful, something where the only responsibility was standing still and looking professional. Davidson smiled slightly. And you've done that admirably for 8 years. No incidents, no attention. Perfect service record as a ceremonial guard. You almost convinced yourself it was real, didn't you? The question hit closer to home than Marcus wanted to admit. There had been days when he genuinely forgot about his past. When the routine of palace duty felt like his true calling. Standing guard had become meditation, a way to find peace after years of life and death decisions. The problem, Davidson continued, is that we need that other Marcus Thompson back. The world has become a more dangerous place and certain situations require someone with your particular skills. Colonel Bradley cleared his throat. Mr. Davidson, are you saying that Sergeant Thompson is being recalled to active special operations? I'm saying that the quiet retirement is over. Recent intelligence indicates several high-priority targets that require elimination. Targets in locations where conventional military action would create international incidents. Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders again. I haven't maintained operational fitness, sir. 8 years of ceremonial duty doesn't prepare someone for field operations. Davidson laughed. Your performance this morning suggests otherwise. Perfect scores under pressure, maintaining operational security under questioning. Situational awareness that impressed a combat veteran colonel. I'd say your skills are intact. A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Another man in civilian clothes entered, carrying a secure communications device. He whispered something to Davidson, who nodded grimly. Gentlemen, we've just received confirmation of a threat that requires immediate attention. A terrorist cell operating from a compound in Eastern Europe, planning attacks on British soil. Local authorities can't touch them due to political sensitivities. Davidson turned to Marcus directly. This is exactly the type of situation that requires surgical intervention. One shot, one elimination, problem solved with no official British involvement. Marcus stared at the photographs scattered across the table, each one representing a life he had taken in service to his country. The weight of those decisions had driven him to seek the peaceful anonymity of palace duty. Now that same expertise was being called upon again. What's the timeline? He asked, knowing that his question represented acceptance. 72 hours. We have intelligence placing the target at a specific location for a very narrow window. Miss this opportunity and innocent people will die in London. Colonel Bradley was beginning to understand the full scope of what he had witnessed at the firing range. The shooting competition this morning wasn't recreational for you, was it? You were testing yourself, seeing if the skills were still there. Marcus nodded slowly. I've been having dreams lately. Old missions, old faces. I thought maybe it was time to see if I could still perform under pressure. And you can, Davidson said firmly. The question is whether you're willing to trade the peace you found for the service your country needs. The room fell silent as Marcus contemplated the choice before him. Return to the world of classified missions and moral complexity, or remain in the safety of ceremonial duty, while knowing that his inaction might cost innocent lives. Outside the window, The afternoon was giving way to evening, and somewhere in Eastern Europe, a target was making plans that would never come to fruition if Marcus Thompson chose to remember who he really was underneath the red tunic and bearskin hat. Marcus stood at the window, watching the sun set over the military base where his carefully constructed peaceful life had come to an end. The decision he faced would determine not only his future, but potentially the lives of countless innocent people. "I need some time to think," he said finally, turning back to Davidson and Colonel Bradley. Davidson checked his watch. "You have until tomorrow morning. The mission window opens in 60 hours, and we need time for briefings and equipment preparation." After Davidson left, Colonel Bradley remained in the room with Marcus. The older officer poured 2 cups of tea and settled into a chair across from his unexpected guest. 8 years is a long time to live a lie," Bradley observed. "Must have been difficult, pretending to be someone you're not." Marcus accepted the tea gratefully. "The strange thing is, it stopped feeling like pretending after a while. Standing guard became real to me. The tourists, the ceremony, the tradition, it all mattered in a way I hadn't expected. But the dreams came back. Every night for the past month. Faces of people I'd eliminated, places I'd been, decisions I'd made. I think part of me knew this day would come." Bradley studied the man across from him, seeing both the ceremonial guard and the special operations soldier existing in the same person. "What made you request the competition today?" Marcus smiled ruefully. "I told myself it was just to see if I could still shoot straight. But truthfully, I think I needed to know if I was still the same person underneath the uniform. And now you know." "Yes. The skills are still there. The instincts, the ability to perform under pressure. The question is whether I want to be that person again." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the base was settling into evening routine, soldiers heading to mess halls and barracks, the normal rhythm of military life continuing around them. Colonel Bradley finally spoke. "I've commanded men in combat, Sergeant. I've seen what those experiences do to good people. The fact that you sought peace instead of glory speaks well of your character. But people are going to die if I don't act. People die regardless of what any of us do. The question is whether you can live with your decision, whatever it is." Marcus stood and walked to the window again. In the distance, he could see soldiers on the firing range, practicing the same skills he had demonstrated so dramatically that morning. Normal soldiers leading normal military lives, unaware of the shadow world that existed parallel to their own. The phone in his pocket buzzed with a text message. It was from his sergeant major at the palace. "Where are you? You missed evening duty. Hope everything's all right." The message brought home the reality of his situation. Somewhere in London, another guard was standing his post, covering for his absence. The routine he had cherished for 8 years was continuing without him. A reminder of how easily even the most established life could be disrupted. At midnight, Marcus made his decision. The next morning, Davidson returned to find Marcus waiting in full-dress uniform. Not the ceremonial red tunic of the Queen's Guard, but the combat fatigues of an active special operations soldier. The transformation was complete and unmistakable. "I assume this means you've accepted the mission?" Davidson asked. "On one condition," Marcus replied. "After this operation, I want to return to the Queen's Guard, not as cover, but as my actual assignment. No more missions, no more recalls. I've done my service to the Crown in other ways. I want to finish it in peace." Davidson considered the request carefully. "That can be arranged, assuming the mission is successful." "It will be successful." The confidence in Marcus's voice was absolute. The certainty of a professional who had never failed when lives depended on his expertise. 3 days later, newspapers across Europe reported the mysterious death of a terrorist leader in his heavily guarded compound. Official statements blamed internal conflicts within the organization. No government claimed responsibility, and no evidence linked the elimination to any national intelligence service. A week after that, Sergeant Marcus Thompson resumed his duties at Buckingham Palace, standing guard with the same silent discipline he had maintained for 8 years. Tourists photographed him, children waved at him, and he remained as motionless and professional as ever. But the soldiers who had witnessed his shooting exhibition continued to wonder about the quiet guard who had demonstrated skills beyond their understanding. Stories circulated in military circles about the competition that had revealed hidden depths in an ordinary ceremonial soldier. Marcus himself never spoke of the mission or his past again. He had found his peace once more, standing guard over tradition and ceremony, protecting something beautiful and enduring in a world that often seemed ugly and chaotic. Sometimes, late at night, fellow guards would notice him scanning the crowds with unusual attention, or catch him checking sightlines and potential threats with professional interest. But these moments passed quickly, and the ceremonial guard would return, steady and reliable as always. The tourists who posed for pictures beside him never knew they were standing next to one of the most effective soldiers in British military history. And Marcus Thompson preferred it that way, having learned that sometimes the greatest service comes not from the recognition of extraordinary deeds, but from the quiet dedication to ordinary duties performed with extraordinary skill.